Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I'm your co-host, JP John Poz from the Two Man Power Trip. Of course, joining me is the co-host, the financial wrestling genius himself, Mr. Lavie Margolin. Lavie, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. We have a very special guest to kick us off for tonight, all the way in Singapore, Greg of Wrestle Max. Greg, how are you?
So Grapple MAX, actually.
Grapple Max, yes. Come on,
Yes,
Lavie.
that's right.
Oh, Grapple.
That's okay.
Now, Grapple Max Pro Wrestling obviously is what it is, Singapore-based wrestling promotion. But Greg, before you kind of get into that, just tell me like your background. Were you always a fan? Kind of just before we get into the business stuff, just you personally.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me on the show. It's very exciting to be here. So I've been a fan since I was something like 5 years old. Very much my dad got me into wrestling back when we were showing it on national TV here in Singapore. So our time was very much watching, the Bushwhackers, Honky Tonk Man, Rick Martel. So at the point, that was one of the biggest things people were watching here in Singapore. So that was my background as a wrestling fan. When it comes down to actually being in the business, I actually joined pretty late in terms of my age. So I got in around 31 into pro wrestling. So that was back in 2013 here in Singapore. And I founded Grapple Max in 2016. So we've been running that for the last 7 to 8 years now.
Have you noticed that it's more popular now, or what? Like, what do you think about the popularity in Singapore as far as pro wrestling?
Yeah, Singapore's an interesting market, right? Where it's not a massive population. So we've got about 6 million people here. Really broad mix of cultures. So here we have the tons of people from Chinese backgrounds, Indians, Malays, all kinds of backgrounds here. And a common thread for us back then was watching wrestling on TV, right? And we talk about what happened on Heat, what happened on Raw the night before. So it was very popular, probably back in the mid 90s when we were all watching it. Then when it dropped off national TV, it moved to cable. That's where it probably became a bit less popular in terms of water cooler conversation. So once it moved there, people began moving on to other things to watch, and it became a bit less of a thing. What we've been doing for the last few years with Grapple Max here in Singapore is we've been focusing very heavily on bringing it back into the conversation, especially for Singaporeans. And that took a lot of effort in terms of trying to reposition. People here have a very high awareness of pro wrestling, but that's good and bad, right? Because they kind of know what it is and they see it as, oh, it's that thing from the 90s. It was that thing that was really violent. It had, ladies mud wrestling and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's not really for me. So I think we felt that we had to try to find a way to reposition it where it's much more focused on, look at how it's very focused on lifestyle changes, how it's focused on health, how it's focused on community. I think that's what's really led to where Grapple Max is today in terms of our growth.
When you look at like old school wrestling, were you guys watching it? Like, was it on a day later? Was it on like a week later? Was it on like live, or how do you?
Yeah,
How do
I
you
don't
guys
think
watch
it was live. It probably wasn't live. I'm pretty sure it was. We watched a lot of Superstars. So I think that was the highlight show. And there was a point, even when it was on cable, that the regional broadcaster actually had someone who would host their own in-house highlight show on I think it was called Star Sports. So it would be this guy speaking in Chinese and English, and he would talk through, hey, this is what happened last night on SmackDown, and it's almost like their own cable hosted highlight show. So probably not live, but probably about a week or a few days after.
You mentioned getting started like in the business a little bit later in life. What made you kind of do it as far as that point in your life? We're like, damn, I got to get in.
Tons of reasons. I actually had a pretty bad injury myself outside of wrestling. In my late 20s, and it's a car accident that I had, which I won't go into detail here. But basically, I had some issues where the doctor said, you probably wouldn't be able to walk again, but if you do, right, go do something crazy. So that was one part. And it was around that time when wrestling in Singapore had begun to start a small group of people who were doing wrestling. So that's where we all got involved in wrestling in about 2013. So that was the initial seed when wrestling got started in Singapore in 2013.
When you look
Yeah.
at you and like getting into behind the scenes, was that like a crazy transition? Like, oh god, I'm gonna get into wrestling now. You know what I mean? Would like financially and everything else, was that crazy for you to do that?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Singapore wrestling scene much. I'm going to assume probably not too much at
Right.
all. So here, I think it's very, very early days for the industry, right? So we're not anywhere near what it's like in the States or the UK or Japan, where it's a profession at this point in time. We have a lot of people who get into it because it's a cool hobby, right? It builds your profile. It makes people go, oh, hey, you're that entrepreneur who's also a pro wrestler. So I got into it, number one, because of course I was a fan, but number two, because I discovered that through wrestling, it really helped me gain a lot of things like, confidence and talking to people and, being on the stage and just addressing 100 people at one time. But the reason why we moved on to creating Grapple MAX in 2016 was because we felt that there were ways we could approach the growth of wrestling in Singapore that could go faster. And 2013, there was a very high barrier to entry, right? So it was a very, very specific culture of, you had to prove yourself to us, right? You had to do, 1,000 squats, 1,000 push-ups to even talk about wanting to be a pro wrestler, right? We will brag to you about all the injuries we've had, like how we fight through cuts and bruises and broken bones, which is great from a very old school, I would say a very carny perspective, where we want to protect the business. But again, going back to how Singapore is a very, very small market, 6 million people, of whom maybe 1% might want to even try wrestling. It's a market where people are very keen to try new things, but they will try it once. And so we felt that if we took the same approach in Singapore, where let's make it really hard to join wrestling and we only want the best of the best of the best, we'd never grow. We would just keep attracting the same, 15 people, 20 people. And it'll be very, very hard to grow the market. So that's why we decided to say, we've got a market here where people want to try things once. People have awareness of pro wrestling, right? They know of it from either as kids, through their parents, or they watch it now. How do we give the best first impression? So that was sort of the seed for how we decided to start a new company called Grapple MAX. So what I did was in 2015, I actually decided to go and see how the more professional, mature industries run pro wrestling. So I wanted to move to Japan to train in Japan with the actual promotions. I didn't know how to get there at that point in time, but I discovered that Dick Togo, this Japanese wrestler currently with New Japan, he had just semi-retired and started a dojo in Vietnam, which is pretty close to Singapore, called New Vietnam Pro Wrestling. So I quit my job. So I used to work in the airport here in Singapore. So I quit my job and said I'm going to go deep into pro wrestling. And I flew to Vietnam. And so I trained with Dick Togo there I was something like his second student. So it was myself and a Japanese young boy he had flown in from Tokyo. So it was us just training, day in, day out pro wrestling in Vietnam. So we formed a bond there, myself and Dick Togo. And then one thing led to another, where eventually I was training in Japan for several months. So I trained in DDT's DNA dojo at the time. I trained in Emi Sakura's Gato Move dojo. I trained in Michinoku Pro Wrestling. And I'm not saying this to say, I've got so much experience in wrestling, because I really don't, compared to a lot of the professionals out there around the world. But for me, what opened my eyes was that we didn't have this system in Singapore. In Japan, where it's a subculture, everyone knows about wrestling. There are wrestling posters everywhere in the bars and the restaurants, and there are wrestling events everywhere you turn. We didn't have a culture like that in Singapore, and I knew there was something I wanted to bring back from Japan to Singapore. And that was in terms of the quality of training, the quality of facilities, the way the sport is presented to people, and the way that the business itself is run, which wasn't quite done that way when I had left Singapore at that point in time.
So with like Dick Togo, with Japan, did you create a relationship with like New Japan Pro Wrestling, for instance?
We did. So New Japan, in fact, they had announced this thing called the Asia Pacific Federation of Wrestling a few months ago. So I think they pushed out a press release about this. So basically, they reached out to a few regions, a few promotions in the region, wanting to form this alliance. So there's us. There is a promotion from China. There is a promotion from Thailand. So a few of these regional promotions came in to be the pioneer members of this alliance with New Japan. So this is something which I've been working on for quite some time. So even when we first launched in 2016, Grapple MAX actually was working with New Japan. So we provided ring crew for them to host a show in Singapore.
Nice.
So I think that was probably the first time they saw, oh, hey, there's a company here who can run this professionally, who can help us support certain areas we need. And we've sort of been talking, back and forth ever since.
Love that. Now I know Lavie's got a bunch of good questions.
Oh, please.
Yes. Love to learn more about the market, but an unexpected question that I was thinking about. I'm not sure if you've been following the podcast the last couple of weeks, but I have sort of a running joke about TNA's press releases where they list more countries that they air than potentially there are countries in the world. So my first question is, does TNA wrestling air in Singapore?
It does. I don't believe it does. Most of us watch it through YouTube. It used to be on cable. Yeah.
Okay, so that's -1 from their list.
Well, I might be wrong.
No. We
We
won't create any controversy and not close any doors to you working with them and collaborating in the
much
future.
appreciated.
So to me, Singapore is really a fascinating market, and let me know if I'm off base. Obviously, I'm learning in a very abstract way, but from what I understand historically, it's been a port city, a very internationally open city. So for those of us Americans that are like, okay, we have a certain perception of Asia and so on in terms of culture sort of developing sometimes in isolation historically, Singapore has never really been like that, or hasn't been like that for a long time, in terms of not only is there the Asian influence, but there's even a very much international business flavor to it. Just as an outlier example, I have a friend from the neighborhood, and she happened to go to an international school in Singapore, and it wasn't necessarily like a completely unique thing. Is that like a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think Singapore's in a very interesting position, right? Where it's a fairly affluent country in comparison to our neighbors in Southeast Asia. With relatively high GDP, very high market of expatriates who come down, and they form their careers and their lives here as well. Language wise, we speak a large range of languages, right? So English, Chinese, Malay, across the board. So I think in terms of how it stands in the region, at least, it's a great place for people who want to enter the region. It's also where regional players want to go to. So I think it's very much tied into how Singapore is as an economy and how it is in terms of its geographical location as well. So pretty much accurate there, Lavie.
So in terms of thinking about your fan base, you had talked a bit about like potentially there's like a lapsed fan base that have a certain perception of wrestling. But as you are attracting fans today, is it sort of introducing them to your style, or is there a certain expectation that people have exposure already to certain forms of pro wrestling?
Yeah, so again, I think there is existing exposure. In fact, the WWE's been here, I think, at least 4, if not 5 times. And that goes back to the days of Hogan and Warrior. I think they were here as well back in the early 90s. So there definitely is prior exposure to pro wrestling. What we've been working very hard on doing is changing those top of funnel points, right? How do we change what gets people into wrestling, especially in Singapore, where people pretty much think they know what wrestling's about? So besides running a very high frequency of shows, we also try and run a lot of cross-disciplinary events that are not purely wrestling shows. So we run things like, in fact, we're running something we're calling a house party tonight, which basically is a very casual event where we invite both the wrestling community and their friends to just hang out in our production studio, where we run things like video game tournaments and impromptu spontaneous matches, Q&A segments. So we make it very much like, here's a place where you can come down and you're not just watching a wrestling show, you are building a community of like-minded wrestling fans. So that's one part. We've also tried to focus on collaborations with other non-wrestling companies. So we once did a pro wrestling poetry performance for an arts festival. If you could imagine that. So think about live poetry rap battles that's choreographed in sync with a live wrestling match, who are reflecting the flow of the back and forth of the poetry contest. Yeah. So I think the good thing about how it is in Singapore is that it's good and bad, where Singapore tends to support things which are very clearly defined. So they'll ask you, hey, are you a sport? Are you an art, right? Where do you sit in terms of how do we define you so we know how to give you support, give you grants? Where do we put you in the newspaper? So people always ask me, are we a sport or an art? And my answer is always, well, who's asking, right? Because we can always play based on what that industry needs. So we've run wrestling events at sports expos. We've run wrestling events at arts festivals. So it's really about finding different ways to bring people in from different markets who know of wrestling but wouldn't think about coming to a wrestling show. And I think that's been our main focus for the last 3 to 4 years.
Love it. I'm not sure if you're familiar with, I think it was the late 80s, very early 90s, where Jeff Jarrett, and I think Jerry Lawler, if not Bill Dundee, wrestled a match sort of coordinated to like a symphony orchestra. Which got them some attention. And the idea of the house party, I think that's something, John, our friends at GCW might want to utilize. They have the July 4th barbecue event, but that kind of gives the feel. So maybe something like that coming to Fight Plus as well. So it sounds like wonderful, ways just to get out there and create awareness. In terms of bringing in talent, are you at the point yet, and have you sort of flown in talent? And who has that been, and how have those relationships developed?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it's something which has been done in Singapore for a long time. So even back in 2013, when we first started, prior to Grapple MAX, shows always focus very heavily on having a major talent to be the draw on the show, right? So we brought in people like in the old days, people like Johnny Gargano, he was here. Seema from Japan were here. Kenny Omega, in fact, was here, I think, for in Singapore a couple of years back. But the way that we approached it was, number one, these are very expensive to fly in, right? And for us, we're a very scrappy promotion where we want to really focus on sustainable promotion of shows. So we focus very heavily on building the local talent for Grapple MAX, and we bring in additional international talent where they are keen to do things like run workshops for us, run fan events for us, where it really helps to grow the market. I think you mentioned TNA earlier on. So we've worked with Mike Bailey before. So he came down in 2018, if I recall correctly. So Mike Bailey's been here. We've worked with a ton of people from different countries. So we brought people in from the Philippines, from Japan, from India, from Malaysia, Thailand. So again, we bring in strategic partners who can really help to boost the local talent pool.
So in terms of, obviously there's what I would imagine at the moment would be the main strategy. We have a certain region, a market, let's maximize that, let's grow, and so on. But obviously you're talking to us in New York and New Jersey. So in terms of building up your visibility and beyond the profile, sort of like a vertical, like an international vertical, is there a strategy? Is that YouTube? Like, what would like your would be, or maybe let's say like mid-range goal in 5 years in terms of like international exposure?
Yeah, so we do have a pretty decent international following. We do post most of our content on YouTube, so we do use YouTube quite a fair bit. Most of our traffic comes through Instagram. So we recently also launched our developmental brand called NWE. So we're pushing a lot of traffic now to both Grapple MAX and NWE to focus on two different markets, right? One market are people who want to just watch the wrestling shows, just follow the narratives. NWE comes in where we want people to watch behind the scenes, right? Know the people who put on the wrestling shows, training videos, behind the scenes content. So overall, it's pushing very heavily on our Instagram content, and that's top of funnel leading to the YouTube long form match content.
Great, thank you. Let me turn over to John.
So what's next for you? What do you got coming up next for Grapple
Yeah,
Max?
so Grapple MAX has always evolved a lot over the years. So in fact, I'm talking to you now, having moved to our fourth location in 7.5 years. In fact, the first 4 to 5 years, we didn't have a ring. So we were wrestling on custom made mats, and we were always sharing spaces with other providers. So we're sharing with a circuit training gym, we shared with a gymnastics gym, we shared with a Muay Thai gym. So last year, we actually just moved to our own production studio. So we thought for the first time, let's raise some funding. So we raised about 100, was it's about 80 to 90,000 US to move to a new place. We had a ring that was sponsored, and we basically built this new studio to facilitate being what we're calling the home of pro wrestling in Southeast Asia, because it really is that. It's got a ring, it's got a training facility. It looks a little bit like Santino Brothers in terms of the setup, where there's a wrestling mat, there's a ring, but we've also got a section where there's sofas, a television. My office is there, and again, house parties being run there as well. So I think the first short-term goal for us is really keep building this studio as that home for pro wrestling. We reached a point now where we have a lot of regional talent asking us, hey, can they come down to be on the next show? Because we run monthly shows here in Singapore. So I think that's the first goal we're working towards, where, again, before we came about, Singapore used to have maybe about 3 or 4 shows a year. We now run about 12 to 13 a year in Grapple Max alone. And that's facilitated very much by having our own production studio. So I think short-term goal here is keep running this high frequency of shows, which does, of course, require a high number of people coming in as wrestling members, and to focus on selling out those shows on a monthly basis. We are actually embarking on a 2-day event where we just announced our tag team titles championships. So these are new belts we just created. So we're having a 2-day tournament at the end of the month called Dual Destinies here in the studio as well. Sorry, Lavie, back to you.
Oh no,
John, back to you.
I was gonna say, what about like some goals? Like what's like some thoughts on the horizon?
Yeah, so I think that was to set sort of the baseline for where we are today. I think in terms of goals, where we want to go really is when people come to our shows, what they tell us usually is quite interesting. They don't tell us that, oh, your wrestling quality is amazing, right? Or your facility is amazing. What they keep saying is that we feel your community is something different. Like we haven't seen a place that's so united, that's so sharing this vision of pro wrestling. So what we are looking towards is, we believe the region is looking towards us in terms of how do we build a culture, a community of pro wrestling where there wasn't one before. So we do want to take this outside of Singapore. Again, it's a very small market here, and I think it is capped in terms of how far we can go in terms of reach. Malaysia is very accessible to us, so is Vietnam, so is Indonesia. These are markets where there are promotions, but we do work closely with them to say, hey, this is the Grapple Max approach to pro wrestling. This is how we grew it in a market where there wasn't much take up for wrestling before this. Can we perhaps come in and help in a particular way? So, for example, we recently worked very closely with our friends in Malaysia Pro Wrestling, who's maybe about a 6-hour drive from Singapore. So we ran a joint event that we called Causeway Jam, and this was the 4th iteration. So the first 3 we ran here in Singapore. We ran the 4th one for the first time in KL, so basically in Malaysia's Kuala Lumpur. Basically, it was a joint event where they brought about half their roster down to do a show here. We brought half our roster up to do our show there. And we sold out both the Singapore and the Malaysia legs 2 months apart. So we think this is one model that works, where we're trying to build these partnerships with promotions around the region, be it in Malaysia, be it Vietnam, be it Korea, be it Japan, where we can really try and drive this Grapple Max approach to pro wrestling.
I love it. Any other goals, like let's say New Japan, or like become like a little syndicate for New Japan or something? Is that a goal?
It's something which we are planting the seeds for. So I mentioned earlier on that New Japan has invited us to their Asia Pacific Alliance. So part of that involves, at least in terms of what we agreed on, in terms of sending people from New Japan to Singapore, of course, to help to run training, to boost the cards. But also it involves sending us to Japan for training and hopefully for perhaps some exhibition matches as well. So that is part of it. In fact, we have actually run a show in Japan before as Grapple MAX.
Oh, awesome.
So that was through a partnership with Michinoku Pro Wrestling, in fact, back in 2018. So we're not new to the idea of running the brand overseas. I think it really is, we know what model has begun to work now, which is a very differentiated approach where it's not just a pro wrestling promotion. It is wrestling for lifestyle, and people come in regardless of where you want to go, right? Whether you want to be a wrestler, whether you're doing it just for fun as a side hustle or a hobby, we have something here that can take you to where exactly you want to go. And we think that can be applied outside of Singapore as well.
Anybody you want to bring in, like you mentioned Gargano before, would you like to bring
Yeah.
Dick Togo in, or like who?
Oh, he's been here. He's been here 4 times. So we've wrestled.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again,
awesome.
he's a very good friend of ours. So he's been here. So Togo is actually our head advisor. So he's actually involved with us on a very regular
cool.
basis. We do want to work a lot more closely with the Japanese promotions. We talk very often with companies like DDT, for example, again, where I trained a couple of years ago. So no specific names on the horizon yet. Again, only because it's not the strategy. So we've reached a point where we're able to sell out the house on a completely local show. And I think that came with not just luck, but also training the audience, right? That you can support local, right? There is very decent talent here in Singapore you can support, and you shouldn't just show up when a superstar comes to town, right? Because that drives down your margins, and also it makes the shows very, very pop heavy, right? People come for the show just for your main event star, and you don't really care about the rest of the card. So I think we're very proud of the fact we come to a point in Grapple MAX now where people come because they follow the local storylines, they follow the local talent. And when we do bring in additional talent, it is to enhance the storyline and not be necessarily a draw in themselves.
I love it. Great idea. Great strategy. Where can everybody find you? Where can everybody find Grapple MAX?
So we're everywhere on all socials, everywhere from X, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. They can find us on Grapple MAX, so one word, GRAPPLEMAX. They can follow me on my Instagram, which is right there in my handle there. So Greg_GPMax is where they can follow me as well.
All right. Greg, thank you so much for all time. Really appreciate it. Good luck with Grapple.
No, thanks for hosting
Thank
me.
you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you,
Take
Greg.
care.
All right, Lavie, let's get to the news. What is going on? What is the latest with AAA?
So, of course, we had been hearing, I think it was your friends over there at the Conan podcast. I think Conan had been talking about for a while that a U.S. deal was coming, but, people talk about deals all the time. So what's happening? So they did land a very good deal in terms of exposure, in terms of networks through Televisa Univision, of course, Spanish language, Hispanic marketed networks. Unimas is the 18th overall in 18 to 49 viewers with 133,000 average in 2023. Different resources have different numbers, but the 32nd most watched network overall with 372,000 viewers, according to Variety, and the 31st most watched network overall, a drop behind the CW, right, which we're talking about NXT coming to the CW. They're basically just there with 364,000. Now, TUDN, TUDN, that correctly in terms of a network, on Mondays at 7 p.m. we'll replay this Unamas show. It's impressive in itself because for TUDN is the 88th most watched network, and their ratings are much higher in comparison to Access TV and Galavision. If for those that remember, longtime Galavision airing Lucha many years ago, but TUDN averages 111,000, which is an 18% decline. But Galavision and Access TV both average about 36,000, in terms of their overall networks. TUDN is in they've lost a lot of homes, generally in terms of traditional cable, 23,000 homes. So that's really impressive, that they're in that small number of homes and they can average that much. Just to drop something in there when I was doing that research, which was really interesting, BN Sports and BN Sports Espanol. BN Sports is just in 10,000 homes now, and BN Sports Espanol is in 6,000 homes.
Oh, interesting there. So, what is going on with Sakyaban? Let's go, Joshi.
Yeah, so one of the things was like, I don't know, like, is there anything that interesting going on with them anymore? Do we need to like cover them? But like,
Oh yeah,
not to be negative on it, but they're in LA. And they always get great coverage. Of course, their ownership is baked into PR and even with Vice connections, from what I understand. But number of different outlets were reporting thousands of people went to LA. I'm not sure, like, I have no idea. Like, were these? I know tickets were on sale, but what was the comps and so on like that? Sorry, my voice is cracking. But Hollywood Reporter reported 2,000 people who flocked to the Trinity Auditorium, and Paper Magazine reported that thousands were there. So they're getting a lot of the positive press, and among those thousands was Nick
yes.
Khan. So I don't since the merger, I don't think we've heard much from Nick Khan in a while, but he seems to be like an indie fan, right? Like he was at Bloodsport, Sukaban, all that sort of thing. Where will Nick Khan show up next?
Yeah, that is odd. Very, very weird stuff from Nick Khan, but I love it. He's a big marker. I love it. Speaking of craziness and lunacy, if you will, what about the Juggalos? What's going on with Juggalos?
Are you down with the clown? So, Juggalo Championship Wrestling is thrilled to announce the launch of an electrifying new series, JCW Lunacy, set to premiere on a bi-weekly basis. This groundbreaking wrestling series promises to deliver an unmatched experience for fans. Stands out as a unique showcase featuring a diverse roster of top-tier talent from renowned wrestling promotions including NWA, MLW, Impact, AEW, AAA, and Big Japan. The series is designed to captivate audiences with its high-energy matches, compelling storylines, and unforgettable in-ring action. Fans can look forward to seeing their favorite wrestlers from across the globe come together in a thrilling fusion of styles and personalities. With its dynamic presentation and high production values, JCW Lunacy is poised to become a must-watch event. I enjoyed having an eye on Billy Corgan and NWA. We're both rock stars running healthy promotions on Rockstar Money. Billy has been running wrestling shows pretty much as long as we have. I want to see. I think it'll be healthy for both of us. We're both alphas kind of thing, and we're friends. Well, I really like him anyway. I've kept an eye on many wrestling promotions and think they're missing something. I loved and admired the wrestling scene and what it has become. I want to give fans an option to watch us along with other favorite wrestling promotions, said Violent J. JCW Lunacy has already garnered significant interest from major television networks and streaming platforms, promising to bring this extraordinary series to a wider audience. Whether you are a longtime wrestling enthusiast or new to the scene, this show is set to entertain and engage viewers with its innovative approach. Violent J and Shaggy 2 Dope, the duo behind ICP, were independent wrestlers in the Midwest before their music career took off. Semi-trained by Sweet Daddy Malcolm Monroe, they broke into the business on Monroe's shows in the early 90s. I did not know this. This is fascinating. Featuring legends like The Sheik and Bobo Brazil. It was during this time that they met and became close friends with RVD and Sabu, establishing connections that would influence their future. So JCW always investing in the wrestling scene. A number of names already attached, like James Storm and Colt Cabana. So a good payday for veteran talent. They always get attention, so I think it's a good thing. I'm curious to see where they land in terms of what I would imagine would be more of a streaming network than a major television platform, but who knows? We usually don't have a lot of Juggalo news, but WrestleTix, as we're recording this today, dropped some interesting information via Polestar. JCW ran a show at the Newport Music Hall. I think we covered it at the time on May 3rd, and the capacity was 800. Tickets sold was 539, so 67%, and a U.S. gross house of 14,105.
Now, what about Freddie Prince Jr.?
So nothing wrong with Freddie Prinze, but I'm more, I believe more in the clowns than Freddie Prinze at the moment. He's been talking so much. My federation, it's still live at the other two places that I'd mentioned, and a third place has jumped in and said they're interested. Prince said excitedly, noting that the newest suitor has begun running things up the corporate flagpole to the actual decision makers. I have 3 places now. I just want 1 yes. If I get 3 yeses, that's awesome. Prince, this was from, I think, Wrestling Inc. originally. Prince is said to be in talks with Premier Sportsnet. I think that was his own streaming network that's actually, I think, rebranding, among other potential broadcasting partners. So I hope that's not, his main, that's not one of 3. His vision hasn't been fully revealed yet, but he has previously reached out to various independent promotions, including House of Glory and TV producers. I have been told that to be correct because I've spoken to somebody that spoke to him actually when he was thinking about doing such things. Prince has also reached out to former WWE superstars, as noted by his musings about Becky Lynch. He'd approached, of course, the late Bray Wyatt about joining at the time. Obviously Bray Wyatt passed away, but sort of exploring this. But it's been a number of years, and it seems sort of like he has a TV pitch, and if somebody's willing to buy it, that'll start a promotion, but not that he has the confidence necessarily to start this promotion overall, no matter how much money he made from Scooby-Doo 2. And maybe Sarah Michelle Gellar is sort of like, well, let's let's not be too hasty here. Our careers aren't what they once were in the 90s. The money is flowing. I'm just freestyling here, but I'm glad that he's being a little bit conservative about starting up also. I think that's a good idea.
What about the world of TNA wrestling? They've got a lot going on, including an NXT, I guess you could say a show up, if you will. They all showed up at NXT.
Yeah, top TNA officials in attendance at NXT Battleground. This is via Mike Johnson. There's a photo. TNA President Anthony Ciccione, Executive Producer Ariel Schnerer, Gail Kim, who has been reported later as the head of talent relations, are all in attendance. And other in attendance as well in support. But as PW Insider said, as we noted over the weekend, the top TNA officials were in attendance at the event. Schneer, who is very much the final say in the day-to-day of the company. Since he's taken that post, Schneer has gotten nothing but good marks for talent, for being forthright with them, and has slowly but surely gained a good reputation for being consistent and solid in his role. One source described him as being the guy who holds everything together. The belief among those we've spoken with is that Greg Bagarozzi has been the point person booking venues for the company in recent weeks. Bagarozzi has worked with ECW and MLW, among other companies in the past, and has been working with TNA for some time. I think he's in the catering business, as I was gathering from his LinkedIn. There was some talk about Bound for Glory being in Europe a few weeks back, but not sure if that's still the direction. TNA is touting it as emanating from one of the most visited cities in the world. And that could be Vegas, New York City, London, or Toronto. Some people were leaning towards London. Then, of course, there was the thing of TNA has nothing booked beyond Tampa. But lo and behold, they had this graphic. And John, thank you for sharing the press release. It was sort of like out. It will have taken place here this or soon to take place. The 15th tickets are available. June 20th and 29th tickets were looking slow in Montreal, according to PCO. Of course, the major event. More than 2,000 tickets had been sold at that time, so likely more. Tampa are State Fairgrounds, Louisville, 30th and 31st at Old Forester's Parish Town Hall. That seems like a popular venue now in Louisville for promotions outside of OVW to book. And Cleveland at Temple Live, another popular venue for wrestling promotions. I believe that's the place that GCW will run as well. So an interesting tidbit dropped from our friends at WrestleTix. This was via Polestar. So they actually had the numbers for a show that they did in Newport, Kentucky recently. May 19th. I didn't have a chance to see if this was day 1 or 2 of that show, but the numbers aren't surprising to me, actually, because every time I've looked at Eventbrite, or when Eventbrite had their total number of tickets sold for TNA, and I divided it by the number of shows that have been run, as well as counting ticket maps for a typical show. So not outliers like Cicero Stadium or Verdun or Las Vegas, but the typical TNA show, it's always been about 200 tickets sold around. So for this show on May 19th, it was reported that 199 tickets were sold out of a capacity of over 1,000. So 19%, with a gross that seemed really low to me for that even 200 tickets sold. 8,887 tickets sold. Dollars, sorry, for the show. Of course, Cicero Stadium is sold out now. One final piece, right, as we, of course, talked about extensively last week, another part of the Anthem empire is Invicta, and it seemed like Invicta was going almost dormant, but they signed a deal now with CBS Sports Network. So CBS Sports Network is a survivor because NBC Sports Network went out of business and so on. The CBS Sports Network does not subscribe to Nielsen, so there are no ratings. So make of that what you will. On there tends to be lower profile sports, but I think this is a good plus for Invicta. And finally, on the TNA side, of course, Gavin Bridge gave us the numbers that we shared last week in regards to TNA's fast distribution. They've always been ahead of things, and they're tracked on 9 large platforms: Freevee, Google TV, Plex, Pluto, Redbox, Roku, Samsung, Sling, and Zumo. Just a +1 in terms of another outlet, and there might be a number of these, but Lights Out Sports TV, which is a newer service, they now stream TNA.
Nice. What about NWA? Are they coming to your neck of the woods?
So, Billy Corgan's NWA to make New York State debut has confirmed that the NWA is slated to hold their first event this fall. We're told the show will be held in Queens. Expectation is this will be a live event and not a TV taping. I'm not sure what the point of I'm not sure what the point of that would be, right? Like, are you going to fly in all of these talent to do a live event? Who's the on the ground promoter? W promotion. I know that Catalyst Wrestling had hosted, some of their title fights. I'm not going to speculate on working with, right? And how can you expect to make money from a live event when it's difficult to draw? But, sometimes it feels like Billy Corgan just wants to get out there. Another interesting thing was that they're having their Samhain event. It's, last year was very controversial in terms of the angle with the sinister minister who appeared to do an angle that as if he was doing cocaine or whatever, and the headline was like, does it snow in Florida? Now Kerry Morton he's very involved not only in front of the scenes for NWA. It's really one of their top stars, and now actually he was on the press release that PW Insider had posted for this Juggalo Legacy show, so really getting involved. But he had, of course, helped promote, and he's still in college, by the way, and part of the gymnastics or cheer team. So really amazing person. But he reflected on LinkedIn about the marketing strategy for Back to Territories. We leverage a robust blend of social media and local media to maximize our reach and engagement. On social media, we utilize platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to create buzz and engage with our target audience. We ran targeted ads, shared behind-the-scenes content, and interacted with fans through live Q&A and engaging posts. We also collaborated with influencers and wrestling enthusiasts to broaden our reach. Local media played a crucial role in our strategy as well. We secured community bulletins, ensuring the event was highly visible. We organize press releases, interviews with wrestlers, and exclusive previews. This multifaceted approach allowed us to create a comprehensive and effective marketing campaign that resonated with both diehard wrestling fans and the general public. As Seth Godin puts it, actually one of my favorite marketing authors, marketing is no longer about the stuff that you make, but about the stories you tell by telling compelling stories and engaging directly with our audience.
Well said for sure. What's going on in the land of GCW? What's going on with GCW?
So just one quick tidbit, or two quick tidbits today, actually. So speaking about Temple Live Cleveland Masonic, so Friday, August 2nd, they are running. Apparently, I didn't double check that. Apparently, it's running against SmackDown in Cleveland, but they're running this bigger venue. 1,150 tickets in the setup. It looks like there's a large balcony that's available, and then there's maybe a second tier balcony behind it. So I don't think that's included in that. So if it had gone amazingly well, if it goes amazingly well, you can open that up, of course. But just in terms of the early days of tickets distributed, 171 of the 1,150 set up. So something to watch. Now, speaking of Louisville as well, so NWA and GCW crossing over in terms of number of markets here. Very small setup in terms of reserve seats based on this venue. So it's like 3 or 4 rows downstairs, and then you have in the balcony reserved, and then a bar up there and so on. So that is all sold out. So that's a good thing, but most of the seats will be general admission.
How about ROW? They've got NXT talent on the show as well.
So a tidbit about Ring of Honor as well. So just to show the continued relationship with NXT and WWE, obviously through Booker T, Zila Fatu posting about time to demolish whoever NXT throws at me. So on June, actually the show took place, so we'll have to flag back on it, whatever we learn. But Danny Limelight and Lexis King, of course, were to face Zila Fatu and Ryan Davidson. So really a unique situation for ROW, which is always making waves, to have access to an NXT talent like this.
All right, let's talk about main pro wrestling scene. Let's talk about Limitless. What's going on with Limitless? Seems like a lot is going on.
So Troy R. Bennett wrote an article called "Maine's Wrestling Guru is Taking the Biggest Chance of His Career." So this was like, as we've talked about it, speculated on, sort of put the pieces together. This article was really a gift to the show because it really covers everything in depth that we've talked about. So I'm going to go through it fully. Randy Carver, the state's most successful homegrown promoter, is a big guy. Still, he looked small standing at center ice inside the dark, deserted Coliseum last week. The sports and entertainment venue can hold almost 4,000 people, but Carver had the silent space all to himself. He's hoping for a different vibe come August 17th. That's when Carter will try and fill every seat with rabid, rowdy fans eager to watch the greatest grappling spectacle he's ever staged. The Coliseum is by far the largest arena Carver has ever tried to fill and the biggest business gamble he's ever taken. Professionally and financially, it's the equivalent of a wrestler leaping off the top rope, hoping to nail an outstretched opponent. If Carver lands a stunt, it could lead to an even bigger event and more success. If not, he could take a financial bath and lose the momentum he's built up in recent years. This is going to be the biggest risk I've ever taken with my organizations. We've got to fill the place. Carver, who also runs a training school, started Sports Entertainment Empire at 18. He's now 27, with a savings account and $700 borrowed from his mom and dad. Since then, the LaGrange native has built his business on high-flying, quality wrestling extravaganzas. Carver said trying the Coliseum feels like a solid next move since Limitless has sold out its last 7 shows dating back to August 2023. However, Carver's usual venue, the AmVets Hall in Yarmouth and Morgan Hill Event Center in Herman, sell out about 380 and 350 tickets respectively. The Coliseum has released an initial batch of 1,400 tickets for the August show, so that's pretty consistent with what we were talking about, of a half house setup, at which Limitless Vacationland Cup is on the line. More tickets may be released if the first group sells out. I'm not worried. Jim Mercier, assistant GM at Coliseum. We've already done some great sales. We sold about 300 tickets in just the first 10 days. In fact, it was Mercier who approached Carver about putting on a show at the historic Coliseum, which saw Muhammad Ali's iconic defeat of Sonny Liston for boxing's World Championship in 1965 with what is known as the Phantom Punch. At first, I thought he just wanted us to do some kind of wrestling-themed night at a hockey game, Carver said. The Coliseum hosts the main Nordiques of the North American Hockey League most of the year. It's also hosted Bruce Springsteen and Bob Dylan many years ago. Mercier said that he and his kids enjoy wrestling on television, and he's often been asked by Coliseum patrons to host such events. Thus, hosting Limitless Wrestling seemed like a no-brainer mix of audience demand and personal enjoyment. And like Randy and his business, we're trying to get back to pre-pandemic times when we were cranking. Mercier said ironing out details with Carver is easy compared to working with some national wrestling promotions he's dealt with in the past. I think there was a Ring of Honor, New Japan type show, or maybe just one independently. Mercier is giving Limitless Wrestling the Coliseum's full technical support, including local beer, fancy lighting, entrance ramp staging, a powerful sound system, and use of video screens on the huge four-sided scoreboard. We're going to dress it up real good. I'm pumped. The Spectacle's main contest will be for Limitless Wrestling's Vacation Line Cup and so on. If all goes well, Mercier said he's already like to host the tournament again next year. Carver's all for that, and he's imagining what the big hall might mean for growing his live audiences exponentially. The goal is to get as many existing wrestling enjoyers in there as possible and maybe make some new fans. After that, who knows? My dream is to take this as far as I can. It's already been a beautiful ride.
What is going on with the Register Herald? What was going on with that?
So a couple interesting local articles that had some good tidbits. They're both pretty long articles, so I hope who runs Retro Reset Video Games located at 2 malls. We've worked heavily with Premier Wrestling League. We got to a point where we knew we were going to have to do our own thing, bought a ring, and then we signed a long-term lease here, so we knew we had the spot. Growth has been constant for the promotion, which has its own TV program with a strong following. It's become so popular that it's branched out, and Retro Reset Wrestling was born. And now the road to Retromania is in place. Retro Reset Wrestling will hold its biggest card so far when it hosts Retromania August 3rd at the Linda K. Epling Stadium in Beckley. Whenever I think of Beckley, I think of that Jim Cornette lawsuit many years ago. It'll be a day-long event starting at noon. The steady growth of the promotion has led to this point. One of the things that's helped in gaining visibility through its television agreement, this is my favorite part, John, with New River Network, which televises the shows at the Crossroads Mall to optimum customers on Channel 5 in Fayette, Raleigh, and Greenbrier counties, and on its bigger platforms, Facebook and YouTube. Between these two platforms, we're averaging 15,000 views a week. We run weekly Thursday at 9 o'clock. Williamson believes a big reason for that is the effort of Jason Schaefer, a longtime wrestling promoter. He ran wrestling shows for years down in Princeton with Joe Brody, now the booker for American Pro Wrestling. We had met a while back, so I brought him in and brought him on staff. The one thing that we wanted to set apart with indie wrestling was we wanted to tell stories. To me, that was the biggest difference in that we're doing right now compared to what a lot of people are. We are on TV every week, and so we want to be able to tell a story. There's no reason to tune in every week if it's just random so-and-so and so-and-so. These guys do a great job and put on shows. Okay, so everyone find that article. Next, from Pigeon 605, Sioux Fall area. Uriah Upton moved back to Sioux Falls reasons to save money and learn wrestling. 22-year-old spent part of his youth in South Dakota, but finished high school in North Carolina. It's warmer there, but expensive. And Rio Vista didn't have something Sioux Falls did. Nick Eugene Dinsmore, the one-time WWE star and longtime trainer, moved to T in 2016, and until about 2 years ago, ran a wrestling school in the town industrial park. I think we covered it when he had the school. Upton had dreamt of performing in the ring since boyhood, so Dinsmore's migration to the Northern Plains felt like almost a match made in heaven. He was right there in the town I used to live in, the town where my mom still lived. So I thought I might as well move back and start training. It's worked out well. In the 2.5 years since his return to Prairie, Upton has suplexed and body slammed top ropes in Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska. But Upton's opportunities limited lately by slow bookings from Flagship Pro for the last year. The promotion has been all but dormant since its last show in March, which came a few months after its purchase by out-of-state investors. Okay, that's something I'm curious about. Fans and performers have been in the lurch in Sioux Falls as a result. In spite of the city's growing crop of homegrown wrestling talent, Dinsmore has moved to Florida. Flagship's local owners still wrestle, but has stepped out of management. So the new talent stepped up. 4 Dinsmore-trained locals launched New Sound Wrestling this spring with an eye to offering fans and wrestlers something consistent and widening its net to draw in more regional and national talent to play off local performers. So I just thought that was really interesting with Eugene having been there sort of helping to revive the scene to a certain point, moving for whatever needs he needed to go to Florida. And now you have this talent that's seeking something more.
I love it. I love it. Now, we covered a lot. We had Greg Ho from Grapple MAX. A lot of stuff that we covered today. A lot of good news. Lavie, let's hit the plugs and head towards the finish. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. Lavie, what do you got going on?
So that's it for the show tonight. We had a wonderful guest and we covered the news. It was great to expand beyond TNA after a couple of weeks of a TNA deep dive. Of course, be sure to follow John on the 2Man Power Trip platforms, which he'll get into in a moment. But you can follow me on Twitter at Lavie Marg, LAVIEMARG. Check out my long form articles on lioncubjobsearch.com and check out our ever growing group on LinkedIn. Back to John.
All right. Yes. Like I said, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. See you right back here next week for a little business of the business. We'll see you next week, folks.